We begin this hour with proposed changes to the way we are treated when we fly. Now, whether you're traveling for business or pleasure, flying can pose challenges, and Canadians are filing record numbers of complaints about their trips, covering everything from delays and cancellations to compensation. Now, the federal government says it is going to address that again. It is overhauling its airline passenger rights charter, which was supposed to address these issues when it was introduced. Here's Transport Minister Omar Alghabra today.
There will be no more loopholes where airlines can claim a disruption is caused by something outside of their control for a security reason when it's not. And it will no longer be the passenger who will have to prove that he or she is entitled to compensation. It will now be the airline that will need to prove that it does not have to pay for it. This will make the process much simpler and push the burden of proof onto the airlines.
One of the key proposed changes there, the CBC's Janice McGregor is following this story, and she has much more for us. So what else did we hear from the minister?
Well, it's interesting. Omar Alghabra said he didn't want to be demonizing airlines. He paid tribute to what a tough few years it's been, particularly for frontline workers in this industry. But at the same time, this was an admission today that even though this government has taken several cracks at trying to improve air passenger rights regimes in this country, there are still loopholes. We saw that over the holiday period when, yes, there was an extreme weather event, but the way people were treated and in the aftermath and the chaos that was caused left a lot of people feeling like customer service just was not where it needs to be for this federally regulated industry. And so we have changes now that will increase the maximum fine that an airline might have to pay from $25,000 to $250,000, much more of a hit to their bottom line. Also, they are asking the airlines to shoulder more of the cost for setting up the complaint system on which all these compensation claims, are processed. And with that, they are hoping that this will provide an incentive for airlines to do better, frankly, so there are fewer complaints in the system. Right now, the backlog of what the Canadian Transportation Agency is dealing with is some 45,000 complaints built up over the chaos of the last couple of years. The government has allocated almost $76 million over 3 years to help clear that backlog, but really they need to deal with the problems that are causing the complaints in the first place. Another loophole they are trying to close here deals with baggage. Right now, you can be compensated for lost baggage, but not necessarily delayed baggage. But of course, if your bag is delayed for weeks and months, you've probably had to go out and replace everything in it anyway. So they're trying to require now airlines to acknowledge that it's a problem for your bag to be delayed arriving significantly as well as lost. And overall, there is, as that clip was hinting to, a real attempt to make it harder for airlines to argue that something was beyond their control and that they couldn't have done better. But notably, the way they're doing it here, there will be some time before this is really in place. Yes, this is out there now, but the actual kind of list of exemptions, so the situations in which an airline wouldn't be accountable, that is going to be subject to a regulatory consultation phase after this bill is passed and wouldn't be in place perhaps until later this year. That may not be comforting to people who have travel plans this summer and want to know that if something goes wrong, they could be compensated.
Now, Janice, these changes still seem to be a bit of a work in process. And so maybe you can talk us through the timing of everything.
Right. So they've been rolled into budget legislation this spring. They're not kind of their own bill to kind of go through and be considered separately. They'll become part of the bigger conversation, if you will, this spring for the Budget Implementation Act. That usually passes before MPs leave for the summer. And then after that, this key list of exemptions will be subject to consultation, as I said. Notably, though, what the government isn't doing with this, it is not yet bringing in any kind of a system for better data sharing, something that was identified as a key aspect of making this industry and the specific airlines more accountable. Those additional measures still to come, apparently. And also, when we're thinking about the hassle that travelers experienced last holiday season, for example, some questions about why there's been nothing done to increase passenger rights for via rail travelers who also went through a lot. Those changes also apparently still coming, according to Omar Alghabra. Just finally, the last thing afoot, it should be noted, the people who actually process these claims, the call centers and stuff involved, of course, we have a public service strike on right now. The minister was asked to comment on that, said he hoped a deal was close, but certainly if they're out for a period of time, that will not help the backlog of outstanding complaints.
Thanks for the latest on this, Janice. That is the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Now, John Graddick is a professor in the aviation management program at McGill University in Montreal, and I asked him what he makes of the minister's announcement today.
I think the minister was very clear that we've got to come up with a system that basically reduces these complaints from starting up in the first place. And I think that he pointed the finger basically at the airlines, the airports, the whole aviation system to say they've got to clean up their act. The whole process of dealing with complaints and dealing with appeals just doesn't make any sense. He basically pointed the finger at the management of airports and airlines to basically make sure that we don't get into situations where passengers initiate a complaint. So there's a need for the industry to kind of get rid of these delays as much as they possibly can. There is going to be an increase in the costs for these delays to the airlines and to the airports. And I think that's a key driver to reducing these delays and these cancellations upfront.
And to your point there, John, really incentivizing for airlines to act more promptly in handling these because it will hit their bottom line, really, when we're talking about that. That said, the compensation, they're changing the burden, putting it more on airlines versus the passenger, but not entirely, as we've seen, for example, in Europe. Do you think these proposals fall short, or is it a gradual process?
I'd like to see the writing, the actual regulation that's going to be put in place. It's a good start. I think that the onus on the airlines is going to be interesting to see how that gets implemented. I think the minister said that compensation will be automatic, and that's a fairly strong worded statement. I really want to understand, what does automatic really mean? The passenger is still going to have to file a complaint and file a claim for compensation. The question is going to be one, like, how does that automatic work? And the other one is the cost of appeals seems to be shifting to a burden for the airlines to start paying for some of that cost rather than for the taxpayer to pay for those costs. So an interesting evolution of these regulations. So I think the proof will be when we see the writing and the actual details behind those regulation changes.
Of course, this would be encouraging news, one would expect, for air passengers. I'm wondering how you think airlines are going to be reacting to these proposed changes.
They're going to be upset. They're going to be very upset. I think that, this is another element of costs that, they're going to complain about, increased costs of fines, increased costs of compensation. The whole point of the exercise is to reduce delays in the first place, not have these delays, reduce the number of cancellations. So you've got to become much more proactive in designing and offering a schedule that has a greater chance of success of being operated, and not to just let the vagaries of market share and marketing drive whether a flight operates or a flight does not operate. So you've got to create an environment where you have much more operating discipline, much more of a planning discipline. Hopefully these regulations will do just that.
And very finally, the last question here, do you believe that the money or, the additional cost here will be passed on to consumers, as the question was asked during the course of that press conference?
No doubt. That's the usual modus operandi of the aviation community, that there's a pass-through of these costs. So, there's going to have to be some pushback by Canadian consumers that, these costs are not acceptable. It really is a function of how airlines decide to plan and operate a schedule. And I think the minister was very, very right in saying market share and competitive behavior will in fact look at ways and means for customers to be attracted to airlines that have a higher degree of schedule reliability and reduce those costs. So those carriers that have a poor operating schedule, that have high degree of frequencies and of delays and cancellations, market will decide whether they survive or not.
That's John Graddick, an aviation management professor at McGill University.